Alice pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the corridor, her heart hammering so hard she was certain the guards would hear it. Through the crack in the door, she watched her father, the man who was supposed to protect her, count gold coins with trembling fingers while the Lycan King's messenger stood in shadow, waiting. "The beautiful one," her father said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Take Sarah. She's the one you want. Perfect skin, golden hair, obedient. She'll make a fine Luna." The messenger's eyes, wolf gold even in human form, slid past her father toward the doorway where Alice hid. For one terrible, electric moment, their gazes locked. He smiled, slow and dangerous. "We'll see what the king wants," he said softly. Alice's blood turned to ice. "Welcome, besties, my amazing family. I'm so happy to have you here once again. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our powerful stories. And please take a quick second to like this video, drop a comment, and share it with someone who loves emotional stories. It really helps the channel grow and boosts our community. Now get comfortable, because today's story is intense. Let's dive right in. Alice had always known she was the spare daughter, the one her father kept in the shadows while her sister Sarah shone like a jewel in the sunlight. But knowing it and hearing him offer her sister to a monster while planning to hide Alice away like a shameful secret, that was different. That carved something hollow in her chest that might never fill again. She slipped away from the door, her worn boots silent on the stone floor, and made her way back to the tiny room she shared with a kitchen staff. Her room, because she wasn't allowed in the family wing anymore, not since Sarah had turned 16 and become the family's investment, as her father called it. Alice was 19 now, and she'd spent the last 3 years scrubbing floors, preparing meals, and making herself invisible. It was safer that way. When you were invisible, you didn't get hurt as often. But tonight, invisibility wouldn't save her. Tonight, the Lycan King of Blackmoor was coming to their estate to choose a bride, and her father had already decided which daughter he'd sell. Alice's hands shook as she poured water into the basin and splashed her face. Her reflection stared back at her, dark hair that never quite behaved, gray eyes too large for her thin face, a smattering of freckles across her nose that Sarah said made her look childish. Plain Alice. Forgettable Alice. The daughter who wasn't worth keeping. "You're crying again." The voice made Alice jump. She spun to find Magda, the head cook, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and her weathered face creased with concern. "What did he do now?" "Nothing," Alice lied, wiping her eyes quickly. "I've seen it." "You're a terrible liar, child." Magda moved into the room and closed the door behind her. "I heard the messenger arrived. I heard what's happening tonight." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And I heard your father in the study, planning to offer Sarah and hide you away in the cellar until the king leaves." The confirmation hit Alice like a fist to the stomach. "He really said that?" Word for word. Magda's expression hardened. "He's terrified the king might see you and want you instead." Apparently, Lycan Kings have a reputation for choosing the unexpected. Alice laughed, but it came out broken. "Why would he choose me? I'm nothing special. Sarah's the beautiful one. Everyone says so." "Beauty isn't everything, especially not to the creatures of Blackmoor." Magda moved closer, her voice urgent. "Listen to me, Alice. Your father is a fool and a coward, but he's right about one thing. Lycan Kings don't think like human men. They don't choose with their eyes. They choose with their instincts, and their instincts are never wrong." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to decide right now what you want. Do you want to hide in the cellar and let your father trade your sister to a monster? Or do you want to take control of your own fate?" Alice stared at her. "I don't understand. What choice do I have?" Magda reached into her apron and pulled out a small bottle filled with dark liquid. "This is nightshade oil, mixed with wolfsbane and silver dust. 1 drop on the skin, and a Lycan will smell you from a mile away. It won't hurt you, but it'll make you impossible for him to ignore. She pressed the bottle into Alice's palm. You want to be seen, girl? Use this. You want to hide? Stay here and let your father lock you away. But choose fast. The king arrives in an hour. Then she was gone, leaving Alice alone with a bottle of poison and a choice that could destroy everything. The hour passed in a blur of panic and preparation. Alice paced her tiny room, the bottle clutched in her hand, her mind racing. She could hide. She could let Sarah go with the king, let her father get his gold, let everything continue as it always had. Sarah would survive, she always did. She was tough beneath all that beauty, tougher than anyone gave her credit for. She'd find a way to manage a Lycan King. But Alice would still be here. Still invisible. Still the daughter her father wished had never been born. The thought made her stomach turn. She looked down at the bottle in her hand, and something inside her, something that had been sleeping for a long time, woke up angry. She uncorked the bottle. The smell hit her immediately, acrid and strange, like burning flowers and metal. Her hands trembled as she tipped a single drop onto her finger and rubbed it against her wrist, then her throat. The oil absorbed into her skin instantly, leaving no trace except a faint tingling sensation. And then she heard it, howling in the distance, deep, resonant, and getting closer. He was coming. Alice's heart kicked into overdrive. She smoothed down her plain gray dress, the only one she owned that wasn't stained with kitchen grease, and tried to tame her wild hair. It was useless. She looked exactly like what she was, a servant girl playing dress-up. But it was too late to change her mind now. She could already hear the commotion downstairs, the servants rushing to prepare for the king's arrival, her father's booming voice shouting orders. She took a breath, opened her door, and stepped into the corridor. The estate had transformed. Candles blazed in every sconce, flowers decorated every surface, and servants moved in synchronized chaos to make everything perfect. Alice slipped through the crowd unnoticed. Old habits died hard, and made her way toward the grand hall where the meeting would take place. She could see her father at the entrance, dressed in his finest clothes, his face flushed with anxiety and greed. Beside him stood Sarah, radiant in a gown of silver and blue, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, her expression serene and empty. Sarah caught sight of Alice, and her eyes widened. She mouthed something that looked like, "What are you doing?" But Alice looked away. She couldn't explain. She wasn't even sure herself. The howling came again, closer now, and then the great doors of the estate burst open. The temperature in the room dropped instantly, and every human present felt it, the primal, instinctive terror that came with predators. Real predators. 3 Lycans entered first, massive men in dark clothing who moved with the fluid grace of wolves. Their eyes scanned the room, assessing, calculating. Behind them came more, 6, 8, 10, until the hall was filled with them, their presence suffocating in its intensity. And then he walked in. Alice had heard stories about the Lycan King of Blackmoor. They said he was ancient, cruel, that he'd killed his last 3 Lunas when they displeased him. They said he could tear a man apart with his bare hands, and that his wolf form was the size of a horse. They said he had no mercy, no softness, no humanity left. They hadn't said he was beautiful. He stood at least a head taller than every other Lycan in the room, with broad shoulders and a presence that made the air itself seem to bend around him. His hair was black as midnight, his features sharp and severe, and his eyes, God, his eyes, burned with a golden light that seemed to see everything, through everything. He wore black from head to toe, and power radiated from him like heat from a flame. He stopped just inside the doorway and inhaled deeply. His head turned slowly, scanning the room, and Alice felt her knees go weak. This was insane. What had she been thinking? She should run, hide, disappear before those terrible eyes found her. Too late. His gaze locked onto hers across the crowded hall, and the world stopped. Alice couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. She felt pinned in place by the weight of his attention, like a rabbit frozen before a wolf. His nostrils flared slightly, and something dangerous flickered across his face. Recognition?
Surprise?
Hunger? Your Majesty. Her father's voice shattered the moment. He rushed forward, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched his knees. Welcome, welcome. We are so honored by your presence. Please, allow me to present my daughter, Sarah. She is... Where is the other one? The king's voice was deep, rough, and absolutely commanding. He didn't look at her father. He didn't look at Sarah. His eyes remained fixed on Alice. Her father's face went pale. Other one? Your Majesty, I don't. The girl by the pillar. The one who smells like nightshade and defiance. He moved forward, and the crowd parted before him like water. Come here. It wasn't a request. Alice's feet moved before her mind could catch up, carrying her forward through the crowd until she stood before him. Up close, he was even more overwhelming, taller, more powerful, more everything. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and when she did, she saw something flicker in their golden depths that might have been amusement. What's your name? He asked quietly. Alice. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Alice Thorne. Alice. He repeated her name like he was tasting it. You're afraid of me. Yes. There was no point in lying. Good. You should be. He circled her slowly, and she felt his attention like a physical touch, assessing every detail. But you came out here anyway, even though you're terrified, even though you knew what I was. Why? Alice's throat was dry, but she forced herself to answer. Because I'm tired of hiding. Your Majesty, please. Her father tried to interject, his voice desperate. There's been a misunderstanding. This is Alice, my younger daughter, but Sarah is the one we prepared for you. She's trained, educated, perfect for. I didn't ask about Sarah. The king's voice dropped to a growl that made every human in the room flinch. I asked about Alice. He completed his circle and stood before her again, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Tell me, little rabbit, did your father try to hide you from me? The question hung in the air like a blade. Alice knew she should lie, should protect her father despite everything. But something in those golden eyes demanded truth, and she found she didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. Yes, she whispered. He was going to lock me in the cellar until you left. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. The lichens around the perimeter growled low in their chests, and her father made a sound like a wounded animal. Is that so? The king's expression didn't change, but his voice carried death in it. And why would he do that? Because I'm not the beautiful one. I'm not worth selling. The words came out bitter, and Alice immediately regretted them. She sounded pathetic, broken. She waited for him to laugh, to dismiss her, to turn to Sarah and accept what her father was offering. Instead, he reached out and caught her chin with his fingers, tilting her face up to his. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but there was steel beneath it. Look at me, Alice.
She did.
She looked into those impossible eyes and saw. What? Anger? Yes. But also something else. Something that looked almost like understanding. You think you're not beautiful because your father is a fool who can't see value beyond a pretty face. You think you're not worth choosing because the humans in your life have trained you to believe you're worthless. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Alice shivered. But I am not human, little rabbit, and I see exactly what you are. What am I? The question escaped before she could stop it. He smiled, and it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once.
Mean it.
The word echoed through the hall like a thunderclap. Alice heard her father's gasp of horror, Sarah's shocked cry, the murmur of confusion and excitement from the assembled lichens. But all of it felt distant, unimportant, because the king was still holding her face and looking at her like she was the only person in the world. Your Majesty, you can't. She's not. Please reconsider. Her father was babbling now, his carefully laid plans crumbling around him. The king finally looked away from Alice, and the full weight of his attention fell on her father like a physical blow. Are you questioning my choice? And no, of course not, but... Then we're done here. Alice will come with me to Blackmore. Tonight. He released her chin and stepped back, addressing the room at large. Prepare her things. We leave within the hour. Wait. Alice's voice rang out before she could think better of it. The king turned back to her, one eyebrow raised. She swallowed hard. I don't have things. And I can't just leave. I need time to... Time for what? To say goodbye to the father who tried to hide you? To the sister who never defended you? His voice softened slightly. There's nothing for you here, Alice. You know that. He was right. God help her, he was completely right. There was nothing here but pain and invisibility and the slow death of being unwanted. But this, going with him, becoming his Luna, entering a world of monsters and moon magic and ancient laws she didn't understand, this was terrifying in a completely different way. I'm afraid, she admitted quietly. I know. He moved closer again, and this time when he spoke, it was low enough that only she could hear. But fear is just another form of awareness, little rabbit. You'll learn to use it. I'll teach you. His eyes gleamed. And if you're very good, I might even teach you not to fear me. That seems unlikely, Alice said before she could stop herself, and then froze, horrified at her own audacity. But the king just laughed, a real laugh, rich and unexpected. Oh, I like you, he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. This might actually be interesting. He turned to his Lycans. Helena, make sure she's properly dressed for travel. Quickly. A tall, stern-looking woman with silver streaks in her dark hair stepped forward and bowed. Torvin, settle the debt with the father. A scarred man grinned wickedly and moved toward where Alice's father stood frozen in horror. Debt? Alice asked. The bride price, the king said casually. It's tradition. Though I'm paying significantly less than I would have for Sarah, since you come to me in servant's clothes with no dowry and no training. He paused, considering. Actually, I'm paying nothing. Consider it compensation for the insult of trying to hide you from me. Alice couldn't help it, she laughed. It was half hysteria, half genuine amusement at the expression on her father's face as he realized he'd get nothing from this transaction after all. The king looked at her with approval. Come, he said, offering his hand. Let's get you ready for your new life. Alice stared at his outstretched hand. This was it, the moment of choice. She could refuse, could beg to stay, could throw herself at her father's feet and plead for another chance to be invisible. Or she could take his hand and step into the unknown. She thought about Magda's words. You want to be seen, girl? Alice reached out and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, strong, careful not to hurt, and something clicked into place in her chest. Something that felt almost like fate. Good choice, little rabbit, the king murmured. Now, let's see if you can survive it. Helena swept Alice away to a private room, moving with the efficient grace of a warrior. Once the door closed behind them, her stern expression softened slightly. So, you're the one who caught his attention. That took courage. That took stupidity, Alice corrected, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. What have I done? You've become Luna to the most powerful Lycan in 5 territories. You've secured a position that hundreds of women would kill for. Helena pulled out a traveling dress of deep green wool, far finer than anything Alice had ever worn. And you've thoroughly disrupted every political scheme in the region, which is honestly impressive. I don't want to disrupt politics. I just wanted... Alice stopped, unsure how to finish. To be chosen, Helena finished softly. To matter to someone. I understand. She began helping Alice out of her servant's dress, with practiced efficiency. But you need to understand what you've walked into. King Dmitri is not a gentleman. He's fair, he's honorable in his own way, but he's also dangerous. He's killed for less than disrespect. And, as is Luna, you'll be held to impossible standards. Then why did he choose me? Alice asked, unable to keep the desperation from her voice.
I'm nobody.
I have no training, no education in pack politics, no. He chose you because you interested him, Helena interrupted. And that's more dangerous than any political alliance. When Dmitri is interested, he pays attention. Complete attention. Most people can't handle that kind of focus. She fastened the dress and stepped back to assess. Can you? Alice met her eyes in the mirror. I don't know, but I guess I'm going to find out. Good answer. Helena's smile was sharp. You'll need that honesty in Blackmore. Dmitri can smell lies like blood and water. She handed Alice a heavy cloak lined with fur. Now listen carefully. The journey to Blackmore takes 3 days, through the wild forest. You'll be surrounded by Lycans the entire time, and they'll be testing you. Watching to see if you break, if you cry, if you complain. Don't give them the satisfaction. How do I? You endure. You observe. You learn. Helena's voice was firm but not unkind. And you never, ever show weakness to anyone except possibly the king himself. Maybe. If you're very sure he's in a good mood. That's terrifying advice. It's true advice. There's a difference. Helena opened the door. Now come. They're waiting, and Dmitri doesn't like to be kept waiting. The journey to Blackmore began in darkness. Alice rode in a carriage with Helena and 2 other Lycan women who introduced themselves as Lyanna and Rhea. Both were younger than Helena, with Lyanna's cautious warmth contrasting sharply with Rhea's cold assessment. The king rode ahead with his guards, a dark figure on a massive black horse that seemed too well-behaved to be fully natural. So, Rhea said after they'd been traveling for an hour, the servant girl who caught the king's eye. How did you manage that? Poison? Magic? Desperation? Rhea, Helena warned.
What? I'm curious.
We've all been wondering what could possibly make Dmitri choose a human with no rank, no training, and no discernible value to the pack. Rhea's smile was sharp as knives. There must be something special about you. Or are you just very, very lucky? Alice felt the weight of their attention, the test behind the questions. She thought about Helena's advice, never showing weakness. But she also thought about the king's words. I see exactly what you are. What was she, really? I used wolfsbane oil, she said calmly, mixed with nightshade and silver dust. I made myself impossible for him to ignore, and when he asked why I'd come forward, even though I was terrified, I told him the truth. That I was tired of hiding. She met Rhea's eyes steadily. So yes, desperation. But also courage, I think. Or maybe just the kind of stupidity that looks like courage when it works out. Silence filled the carriage. Then Lyanna laughed, bright and surprised. Oh, I like her. You manipulated a Lycan King, Rhea said slowly. That's either brilliant or suicidal. Probably both, Alice admitted. But it got me out of my father's house, so I'm calling it a win for now. Helena was smiling slightly. You might survive this after all, girl. The compliment warmed Alice more than she expected. But the warmth faded as the carriage continued into darker, wilder territory. She could hear howls in the distance now, not the Lycans traveling with them, but something else. Something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. What is that? She whispered. Rogues, Helena said quietly. Lycans who've lost themselves to madness. They hunt these forests, and they're always hungry. She glanced at Alice. Stay in the carriage no matter what happens. If we're attacked, let us handle it. Your job is to survive, understand? Alice nodded, but her heart was racing. This was real. This was actually happening. She was traveling through monster-infested wilderness with creatures who could kill her without thinking, heading toward a castle ruled by a king who'd claimed her on a whim. What had she been thinking? The carriage lurched to a stop. Alice heard shouting outside, and then the unmistakable sound of violence, snarls, screams, the wet crunch of bone. Helena was out of the carriage in an instant, her body already shifting, bones cracking and reforming as she changed into something between human and wolf. Lina followed, but Rhea stayed behind, positioning herself between Alice and the door. "Don't move," Rhea ordered. "Don't make a sound." Alice pressed herself back against the seat, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles went white. Through the small window, she could see chaos, massive wolves fighting in the darkness, blood on the ground, and in the center of it all, the king. He'd shifted fully, and he was enormous, black-furred and terrifying, moving with a speed and power that didn't seem possible. He tore through the rogues like they were made of paper, protecting the carriage, protecting her. He was protecting her. The realization hit Alice like a thunderbolt. This creature, this monster, this king who could have any woman in 5 territories, he was fighting for her. Not for an alliance, not for politics, but because she was his now and he protected what was his. The fight ended as suddenly as it began. The rogues, what was left of them, fled into the darkness, and the king shifted back to human form. He was covered in blood that wasn't his own, his clothes torn, his chest heaving. He strode to the carriage and yanked the door open, his golden eyes blazing as they found Alice.
"Are you hurt?" he demanded.
"No," Alice managed.
"I've fine."
"Are you?" He was on her before she could finish, pulling her from the carriage and into his arms, his hands running over her shoulders, her arms, checking for injuries with an intensity that bordered on violent. "You're sure? They didn't touch you? You didn't see anything that—" "I'm fine," Alice repeated, and without thinking, she reached up and touched his face. His skin was hot, almost feverish, and she could feel him trembling with barely controlled adrenaline. "You protected me." Something in his expression cracked. "Of course I protected you. You're mine." He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world, like there was no other possible outcome. "And what's mine stays safe. Always." Alice felt something shift in her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fur-lined cloak or the press of his body against hers. This was dangerous, this feeling. This was how you got your heart broken by a man, a creature, who saw you as a possession rather than a person. But his hands were still shaking as he held her, and his eyes held something that looked almost like fear. "Thank you," she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment, then abruptly released her and stepped back. "Get back in the carriage. We're moving on." His voice was rough, controlled. The moment of vulnerability, if that's what it had been, was gone. "Helena, Torvin, scout ahead. Make sure the path is clear. I want no more surprises tonight." The rest of the journey passed in tense silence. Alice couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd touched her, checking for injuries like it was the most important thing in the world. Like she mattered. Quick pause. If this story has you hooked, tap like and drop your thoughts below. Now, back to the story. They reached Blackmoor on the 3rd day, as dawn was breaking over the mountains. Alice got her first glimpse of the king's territory through the carriage window and felt her breath catch. The castle, if you could call it that, was built into the mountainside itself. All dark stone and sharp towers that seemed to grow from the rock like teeth. Below it spread a village that looked both medieval and strangely modern, with Lycans moving about their business in the early morning light. "Welcome to Blackmoor," Helena said, watching Alice's expression. "Your new home." Home. The word felt foreign. Alice had never really had a home, just a place where she'd been allowed to exist. But as the carriage wound its way up the mountain road toward the castle gates, she felt something stirring in her chest. Not quite hope. Not quite fearful. Something in between. The king was waiting at the gates, back in human form and dressed in fresh clothes, looking every inch the ruler he was. As Alice stepped from the carriage, the assembled Lycans all turned to look at her, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all studying the human girl their king had chosen. The weight of their attention was crushing. "Alice Thorne," the king announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "My chosen Luna. She will be treated with respect and honor due to her position. Anyone who challenges this answers to me." His eyes swept the crowd, and Alice saw several Lycans drop their gazes, submitting to his authority. "We will begin the trials at moonrise. Until then, she is under my personal protection." Trials. The word sent ice through Alice's veins. Nobody had mentioned trials. The king descended the steps and offered his hand. Alice took it because she had no choice, and allowed him to lead her into the castle. The moment they were inside and away from the crowd, she stopped. "What trials?" she demanded. He looked down at her, one eyebrow raised. "The Luna trials. 3 tests to prove you're worthy of your position. Did you think I could just declare you Luna and the pack would accept it? You have to earn their respect. You could have mentioned this before we got here. Would you have come if I had?" He tilted his head, studying her. "Would you have gotten in the carriage if I told you that you'd have to hunt and fight and prove yourself in front of hundreds of Lycans who think you're too weak to survive?" Alice opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again.
He was right.
She probably would have run. "The trials begin at moonrise," he continued. "That gives you 12 hours to prepare. Helena will explain what you'll face and help you train. If you fail..." "What happens if I fail?" Alice interrupted. She needed to know the truth, all of it. The king's expression went carefully neutral. "Then you return to your father's house, and I choose another Luna. That's it?"
No punishment? No.
"No punishment," he confirmed. "I don't punish people for being what they are, Alice. If you're not strong enough for this life, that's not a failure. It's just a fact." He paused. "But I don't think you'll fail." "Why not?" "Because you didn't run when I chose you. You didn't break during the journey. And you're still standing here asking questions instead of crying in a corner." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "You're stronger than you think, little rabbit. Now you just have to prove it to everyone else." Then he was gone, leaving Alice alone in the massive stone corridor with her heart pounding and the weight of the coming trials pressing down on her like a physical thing. 12 hours. She had 12 hours to become someone worthy of being a Lycan queen. It wasn't nearly enough time. Helena found Alice an hour later, standing at a window overlooking the training grounds where Lycans sparred and shifted and moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible. "Seen enough?" Helena asked. "I'll never be able to do that," Alice said quietly. "I'm human. I can't shift, can't fight like they do, can't." "The trials aren't about being Lycan," Helena interrupted. "They're about being Luna. There's a difference." She gestured for Alice to follow.
Come.
"We have work to do, and not much time." They descended into the heart of the castle, through corridors that grew progressively older and more primal, until they reached a chamber that looked like it had been carved from the mountain itself. Ancient symbols covered the walls, and the air hummed with something Alice couldn't quite name, power, maybe, or memory. "This is the Luna's sanctuary," Helena explained. "Every Luna before you has stood in this room and prepared for the trials. Some passed. Some didn't." She moved to the center of the room where 3 objects lay on a stone altar, a silver knife, a compass that didn't point north, and a small vial of dark liquid. The 3 trials test 3 things: survival, wisdom, and courage. You'll face each in turn, and the pack will watch. They're designed to break you, Alice. To expose every weakness, every fear, every reason why you shouldn't be here. Alice stared at the objects, her mouth dry. "Tell me what I'll face." "All of it." Helena's respect for her visibly increased. "The first trial is the hunt. You'll be released into the forest with nothing but that knife. You'll have until dawn to evade the pack's best hunters while they try to capture you. If they catch you, you fail. If you survive until sunrise, you pass. How many have passed? In the last century? 4 out of 12. Helena's voice was matter-of-fact. The second trial is the wisdom trial. You'll be presented with 3 scenarios involving pack law, disputes, or moral dilemmas. Your answers will be judged by the elders. There's no right answer, but there are many wrong ones. And the third. Helena's expression darkened. The courage trial. You'll face your deepest fear, made manifest by the pack's moon magic. It's different for everyone. Some see their own death. Some see the death of those they love. Some see things I can't even describe. She met Alice's eyes. That's the one that breaks most candidates. Because you can't fight fear with strength. You can only endure it. Alice felt her knees go weak. This was insane. She couldn't do this. She wasn't strong enough, brave enough, smart enough. Stop, Helena said sharply. I can see the panic in your eyes. Listen to me, Alice. The king chose you for a reason. He sees something in you that he needs, something that makes you worthy of standing beside him. Do you think he'd risk his pack's stability on a whim? Do you think he'd claim someone he believed would fail? Then why not just make me Luna without the trials? Because the pack needs to see you earn it. They need to witness your strength, so they'll follow you when it matters. Helena's voice softened. And you need to prove it to yourself. Because, right now, you don't believe you're worthy. And a Luna who doesn't believe it herself is more dangerous than no Luna at all. The words hit harder than they should have. Alice had spent so long being invisible, being worthless, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to believe in anything about herself. But Helena was right, she needed this. Not for the pack, not for the king, but for herself. Teach me, Alice said. Show me how to survive. Helena smiled, fierce and proud. Now you sound like a Luna. Let's begin. The next hours were brutal. Helena taught Alice how to move silently through undergrowth, how to mask her scent with mud and plants, how to read trail signs and avoid detection. The knife work came harder. Alice had never held a weapon before, and her hands shook every time Helena demonstrated a strike or parry. But she learned. She absorbed every lesson, every technique, every scrap of knowledge Helena offered, burning it into her memory. You won't win by being stronger, Helena said as they practiced. You'll win by being smarter. Use the terrain. Use your size. You're smaller than any Lycan, which means you can hide in places they can't reach. And use your humanity. We hunt by scent and sound and instinct. You think differently. Use that advantage. What about the other trials? Alice asked, breathing hard as she dodged another strike. The wisdom trial is about understanding pack dynamics. Remember this. Lycans value loyalty above all else, but they also respect strength and cunning. When in doubt, choose the answer that protects the pack as a whole, even if it seems cruel. Helena paused. And the courage trial. I can't help you with that. Fear is personal. You'll have to face it alone. They trained until Alice's muscles screamed and her hands bled from gripping the knife. She was exhausted, terrified, and more alive than she'd ever felt. When Helena finally called a halt, the sun was setting and Alice had only hours left before the trials began. Rest, Helena commanded. Eat something. And Alice. She waited until Alice looked at her. Remember that the king is watching. He won't interfere, but he'll be there. If you need strength, look for him in the crowd. Why would that help? Helena's smile was knowing. Because you matter to him. More than he's admitted. Maybe even to himself. And knowing that someone powerful believes in you, that can make all the difference. Alice was taken to a chamber to rest, but sleep was impossible. She paced the room, her mind racing through everything Helena had taught her, trying to prepare for the impossible. Through the window, she could see the moon rising, full and huge and silver. Under its light, she would either prove herself or fail completely. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting Helena. It was the king. He stood in the doorway, still dressed formally, but with his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then he stepped inside and closed the door. "You should be resting," he said. "I can't." Alice wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm too scared." "Good. Fear keeps you alert." He moved closer, his presence filling the room. "I came to give you something." He held out a small object, a silver pendant on a leather cord, carved with symbols Alice didn't recognize. "This was my mother's. She wore it during her trials. It won't protect you, won't give you power. But it's a reminder that you're not the first to walk this path and feel afraid." Alice took it with trembling fingers. "Did she pass? Your mother?"
She passed.
"And she was one of the strongest Lunas our pack has ever known." His voice carried pride and old grief. "She would have liked you, I think. You have her stubbornness." "Is that a compliment?" "With me? Always." He reached out and fastened the pendant around Alice's neck, his fingers brushing her skin and sending shivers through her. "Listen to me, Alice. The pack will try to break you tonight. They'll push you, test you, look for every weakness. But you've already survived more than most of them know. You survived a father who tried to erase you. You survived invisibility. You survived choosing yourself over safety." His hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. "Tonight is just one more thing to survive. And you will, because you're mine, and what's mine doesn't break." The possessiveness in his voice should have bothered her, should have felt confining, objectifying, wrong. Instead, it wrapped around her like armor. She wasn't alone in this. She had him, whatever that meant, whatever he was, however dangerous this connection between them might be. "What if I fail?" she whispered. "Then I'll take you somewhere safe and find another Luna." His jaw tightened. "But I won't lie to you, Alice. Losing you would displease me greatly. So don't fail. Fight. Survive. Show them what I already see." "What do you see?" He leaned down until his forehead nearly touched hers, his voice dropping to something private and fierce. "A girl who painted herself with wolfsbane and walked into a room full of predators because she was tired of being invisible. A woman who took my hand when she could have run. Someone brave enough to be terrified and do the thing anyway." His thumb brushed across her cheek. "I see my Luna. Now you need to see her too." Then he was gone, leaving Alice standing in the center of the room with her heart pounding and the pendant warm against her skin. She touched it gently, feeling the carved symbols beneath her fingers, and something settled in her chest. Not confidence, exactly, but maybe the beginning of belief. She could do this. She would do this, because she was tired of being the girl who disappeared. The trials began at moonrise in a massive circular arena carved into the mountainside. Hundreds of Lycans filled the terrace seating, their eyes glowing in the darkness as they watched Alice enter the center. She wore simple leather clothing that Helena had provided, practical, durable, designed to survive the hunt. The silver knife was sheathed at her belt, and her mother's pendant, no, the king's mother's pendant, hung around her neck. The king sat on a throne-like chair at the highest point, flanked by his most trusted advisors. His face was impassive, unreadable, but Alice could feel his attention like a physical weight. She looked up, met his eyes across the distance, and saw him incline his head slightly. It could have meant anything. She chose to believe it meant "I'm with you, Alice Thorne." A voice boomed across the arena. Torvin, the scarred warrior who served as the king's second. "You have been chosen as Luna by our king. But choice alone does not make you worthy. Tonight, you will prove your strength through 3 trials: the hunt, the wisdom, and the courage. Fail any trial, and you forfeit your claim. Do you accept these terms?" Alice's voice rang clear and strong. I accept. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Apparently, most candidates needed more time to answer. But Alice was done hesitating, done second-guessing. She'd made her choice, and now she'd live with it. Then let the first trial begin. Torvin gestured to the forest beyond the arena. You'll have 1 hour to run and hide before the hunters are released. You must survive until dawn without being captured. The hunters may track you by any means necessary, but they cannot harm you. If they catch you, they will bring you back here, and the trial ends. His smile was sharp. Any questions? Just one, Alice said. How many hunters?
5.
Our best. 5 expert Lycan hunters tracking one human girl through miles of forest in the dark. The odds were impossible. Alice felt fear spike through her, but she pushed it down. Fear was just awareness. Helena had said that, or maybe the king had. Either way, it was true. Understood, Alice said. Then run, little Luna, and may the moon light your path. Alice ran. She sprinted from the arena into the tree line, her heart hammering, her breath already coming hard. Behind her, she could hear the crowd's noise, cheers, jeers, bets being placed on how long she'd last. She blocked it out and focused on what Helena had taught her. Move fast at first to get distance, then slow down and be smart. Don't leave an obvious trail. Use the terrain. The forest was dark and wild, the moonlight barely penetrating the canopy. Alice ran for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, then forced herself to slow down and think. She found a stream and waded through it to break her scent trail, then climbed onto rocks to avoid leaving footprints. Her hands shook as she grabbed handfuls of mud and smeared it over her exposed skin, masking her human smell. Think, Alice. You're smaller, slower, weaker. What advantages do you have? She could climb. Lycans were big and powerful, but that mass made them less agile in tight spaces. Alice found a massive oak tree with branches that started high up, too high for easy access. She wedged her knife into the bark, used it as a handhold, and pulled herself up with every ounce of strength she possessed. Her arms screamed in protest, but she kept climbing until she was 30 feet up, hidden in the dense foliage. Then she waited. The hunters came 20 minutes later. She heard them before she saw them. The whisper of movement, the crack of branches, the low growl of communication. 5 shapes materialized below her tree, massive lichens in half-shifted form, their noses to the ground as they tracked her scent. Alice held her breath, not daring to move, as they circled the area. She came this way, one muttered. Through the stream, but the trail ends here. She's clever, another acknowledged. Using water to mask her scent. But she can't have gone far. Spread out. She's nearby. I can smell fear. They could smell her fear. Of course they could. Alice pressed herself against the trunk, making herself as small as possible, and tried to control her breathing. I tried to think past the terror. The hunters spread out, moving away from her tree in different directions. Alice waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then carefully, silently, began climbing higher. If they came back, she wanted to be invisible. She wanted to be air. Hours passed. The moon moved across the sky. Alice's muscles cramped from staying still, her throat was parched, and every sound made her flinch. But she held her position. She endured. The hunters returned twice more, circling below her, their frustration growing. She's vanished, one snarled. How does a human girl vanish? The king chose well, another said grudgingly. She's smarter than she looks. They moved on, and Alice stayed in her tree, counting the minutes, watching the sky for the first hint of dawn. Her entire body ached. She was cold, exhausted, terrified. But she didn't move, didn't give up, didn't climb down. When the first rays of sunlight broke over the mountains, a howl went up from the arena, long, clear, victorious. The trial was over. Alice had survived. She climbed down from the tree with shaking limbs and emerged from the forest to find the entire pack waiting. They erupted into cheers, surprised, impressed, and approving. Alice walked through them on unsteady legs, covered in mud and leaves, her hands bleeding from the climb, but her head held high. The king was standing at the edge of the arena, and when his eyes met hers, she saw something fierce and proud blazing there. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but she felt his approval like warmth spreading through her chest. "The first trial has passed," Torvin announced. "The hunt has survived. Now we move to the wisdom trial." Alice barely had time to catch her breath before she was led to a different part of the arena, this time facing 3 elders who sat in judgment. They were ancient, these Lycans, with gray in their fur and power in their bones. They looked at Alice with eyes that had seen centuries of Lunas come and go. "3 scenarios," the eldest said, her voice like a grinding stone. "3 answers. Choose wisely, Luna candidate." The first scenario was presented. 2 pack members are caught stealing food from the communal stores during a harsh winter. One is a young mother with hungry children. The other is a healthy warrior with no dependents. Both are guilty of the same crime. What punishment do you decree? Alice's mind raced. The easy answer was to punish them equally. Justice was blind after all. But Helena had said to think like a Luna, to protect the pack. She took a breath and answered. The warrior faces full punishment. He stole from his own pack when he had no need. But the mother's punishment is delayed until spring, and in the meantime, we investigate why she felt stealing was her only option. If the pack is failing to feed its members, that's a larger problem than one woman's crime. The elders exchanged glances. The middle one spoke next. "A neighboring pack requests passage through our territory to reach better hunting grounds. They offer tribute but are known to be aggressive and unpredictable. Do you grant passage?" "I grant passage under escort," Alice said carefully. "They travel only on the path we designate, with our warriors watching their movements. The tribute is paid up front, and they're given a time limit. If they break any terms, they're expelled immediately and future passage is denied. We help them, but on our terms." The youngest elder, though still ancient by human standards, presented the final scenario. You discover that your own mate, the Alpha, has killed a pack member without trial. The pack is divided on whether the killing was justified. What do you do? This was a trap. Alice could feel it. Any answer that sided against the king would suggest disloyalty. Any answer that blindly supported him would suggest weakness. She thought about the king's words, "What's mine doesn't break." But also Helena's advice, "Protect the pack." "I investigate," Alice said firmly. "I speak to my mate privately and demand the full truth. I speak to witnesses. I learn everything I can. Then I call a council of elders and present the facts, and we decide together whether justice was served or whether restitution is owed. Because my loyalty is to my mate, but my responsibility is to the pack. And a Luna who allows injustice from anyone, even the Alpha, has failed her people." The silence that followed was deafening. Alice was certain she'd failed, certain she'd said the wrong thing, certain. "Well spoken," the eldest said quietly. "You understand that being Luna means balancing power with wisdom, loyalty with justice. You pass the wisdom trial." The relief was so intense Alice nearly collapsed. 2 down, 1 to go. The courage trial was held at midnight, in the Luna sanctuary deep beneath the castle. Alice was brought there alone, the door sealed behind her, leaving her in darkness broken only by the moonlight streaming through a crack in the ceiling. The air felt thick, charged with magic that made her skin prickle. "Face your fear," a voice whispered, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "See what breaks you." The darkness shifted, and Alice watched in horror as shapes formed from shadow. Her father appeared first, his face twisted with disgust. You thought you could be something, he spat. You thought you mattered. But you're still nothing. Still worthless. The king will see it soon enough, and then you'll come crawling back, and I won't take you in. You'll die alone and forgotten, just like you deserve. Alice's breath caught. This wasn't real. She knew it wasn't real. But her father's words still cut deep, hitting every insecurity she'd ever had. The scene shifted. Now she was back in the servants' quarters, invisible again, watching Sarah laughing with their father while Alice scrubbed floors. Did you really think running away would change anything? Sarah's voice was mocking. You can't escape what you are. You can't escape being the unwanted one. This isn't real, Alice said aloud, her voice shaking. This is the trial. This is fear. Oh, it's real, her father said. We're the truth you've been running from. You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere. And soon everyone will see it. The shadows grew darker, suffocating, and Alice felt panic rising. This was exactly what she'd always feared, that she was fundamentally unworthy, that being chosen had been a mistake, that she'd be exposed and rejected and left with nothing. The fear wrapped around her throat like hands, choking her. But then she felt the pendant against her skin. The king's mother's pendant. And she remembered his words. What's mine doesn't break. You're right, Alice said to the shadows, her voice growing stronger. I was unwanted. I was invisible. I was the daughter no one valued. She stood up, facing the illusions directly. But that's not who I am anymore. I chose to step forward. I chose to be seen. And yes, maybe I'll fail. Maybe the king will realize I'm not good enough. Maybe the pack will reject me. She felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have been brave enough to reach for something more than the nothing I had. So yes, I'm afraid.
I'm terrified.
But I'm not broken. Not by you, not by my past, and not by my fear. The shadows hesitated, flickered, and then dissolved like smoke. The sanctuary brightened, the oppressive magic lifting, and Alice was left standing alone in the moonlight, shaking but whole. The door opened. The king stood there, and for once, his carefully controlled expression had cracked. He looked at her with something raw in his eyes, pride, yes, but also something deeper. Something that looked almost like awe. You passed, he said quietly. All 3 trials. You're Luna now, Alice. Officially. Undeniably. Alice started to laugh, and then she was crying, and then somehow the king was across the room with his arms around her, holding her up as everything she'd been holding back crashed through her. I did it, she sobbed against his chest. I actually did it. I never doubted you, he murmured into her hair. Not for a moment. You're a liar, Alice said, but there was no heat in it. You were worried. Terrified, he admitted, and the honesty in his voice made her look up at him. I've faced armies and rogues and challengers for my throne, and none of it scared me like watching you in those trials. Knowing I couldn't help you. Knowing you had to face it alone. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. But you were magnificent, little rabbit. Absolutely magnificent. Alice stared up at him, this powerful creature who'd chosen her for reasons she still didn't fully understand, and felt something shift in her chest. Something dangerous and thrilling and terrifying in its own way. What happens now? She whispered. His eyes darkened, and she felt heat radiate from him. Now we have the bonding ceremony. Now I make you mine in every way that matters. Now you become Luna, not just in name, but in truth. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her skin. If you're ready. Was she ready? To bind herself to this man, this king, this creature who is dangerous and possessive and somehow exactly what she needed? To step fully into a life that would be nothing like the invisible existence she'd known? Alice thought about the girl who'd painted herself with wolfsbane and walked into a room full of predators. She thought about surviving the hunt and facing her deepest fears. She thought about the way the king had looked at her from the moment he'd chosen her, like she was precious, valuable, worth protecting. "I'm ready," she said. The bonding ceremony was held in the great hall at dawn, with the entire pack assembled to witness. Alice wore a gown of deep green that Helena had provided, and her hair, her wild, uncontrollable hair that had always embarrassed her, was left loose and free. The king met her at the center of the hall, dressed in black with silver accents, looking every inch the ruler he was. Torvin performed the ritual, speaking words in the old language that Alice didn't understand but felt in her bones. The king took her hand, his touch warm and sure, and spoke his vow. "I claim you as mine, Alice Thorne. My Luna, my mate, my equal. Your enemies are my enemies. Your burdens are my burdens. Your triumphs are my triumphs. By moon and blood and ancient law, I bind myself to you." Alice's turn. Her voice didn't shake. "I accept your claim, Dimitri of Blackmoor. I stand as your Luna, your mate, your equal. I will guard your pack, defend your honor, and stand beside you in darkness and light. By moon and blood and ancient law, I bind myself to you." Torvin brought forward a silver cup filled with dark liquid, the binding draught that would seal their connection. The king drank first, his eyes never leaving hers, then handed the cup to Alice. She raised it to her lips and drank, tasting herbs and honey and something wild she couldn't name. The effect was immediate. Heat flooded through her, and suddenly she could feel him, not just physically present but connected to her in a way that defied explanation. She could sense his emotions, his steady strength, his fierce protectiveness, and underneath it all, something that felt almost like loneliness finally easing. Their connection snapped into place like puzzle pieces finding their fit, and Alice gasped at the intensity. "Easy," the king murmured, steadying her. "The bond takes time to adjust to. Just breathe." But Alice didn't want to breathe carefully or adjust slowly. For the first time in her life, she felt completely, utterly connected to someone. Seen and known and valued. The sensation was overwhelming and perfect and terrifying. The king's hand came up to cup her face, and he leaned down until his forehead touched hers. "Hello, Luna," he said softly, and she heard the words not just with her ears but through the bond, warm and intimate and hers. "Hello, Alpha," she whispered back. The pack erupted into cheers. The ceremony was complete. Alice was Luna of Blackmoor, bound to the king, accepted by the pack. But as the celebration continued and Lycans came forward to formally acknowledge her, Alice caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the hall. A man standing in the shadows, watching her with eyes that held something dark and calculating. When he noticed her attention, he smiled slightly and melted back into the crowd. Through the bond, she felt the king's attention sharpen. "What is it?" "Someone was watching me," Alice said quietly. "In the shadows." He didn't look friendly. "Varric," the king said, his voice going hard. "He's a warrior who opposed your selection. He believes humans weaken the pack." His arm tightened around her waist. "Don't worry about him. I'll handle any threats to you." But Alice couldn't shake the feeling that Varric's hostility was more than simple prejudice. Something in his smile had promised trouble, and trouble was coming whether the king could handle it or not. The next days passed in a blur of introductions, lessons, and adjusting to her new life. Helena became Alice's constant companion, teaching her pack politics and protocol, while Lina offered friendship and Rhea maintained cautious distance. The king was attentive but busy, dealing with pack business and border disputes that kept him occupied. Alice threw herself into learning everything she could about being Luna. She met with the mothers and children, visited the sick, studied pack law and history. She was determined to prove that the king's choice hadn't been a mistake, that she could be valuable to Blackmoor despite her humanity. But the whispers followed her everywhere. The human Luna. The weak one. How long until she breaks? Alice ignored them as best she could, but each comment was another small cut, another reminder that many in the pack saw her as inadequate. The worst was Varric. He never confronted her directly, but Alice would catch him watching her with a cold assessment in his eyes. He'd make comments just loud enough for her to hear about humans being fragile, about the pack needing strength, about how unusual it was for a king to choose sentiment over sense. "Ignore him," Helena advised. "He's testing you, trying to provoke a reaction. Don't give him one." But Alice couldn't ignore the growing tension she felt through the bond. The king was worried about something, distracted in a way that had nothing to do with normal pack business. When she finally cornered him in his study late one night, he looked exhausted. "Tell me what's wrong," Alice said. "I can feel it through the bond. Something's happening." The king stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "Come here." He pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her, and Alice felt some of his tension ease. "We have a problem. Reports from the border suggest that someone's been provoking conflicts with neighboring packs. Small things, stolen livestock, violated territorial boundaries, insults to visiting dignitaries. Nothing major individually, but together it paints a pattern. Someone's trying to start a war," Alice said slowly. "Why?" "Because war would force me to act aggressively, would require me to prove the pack's strength through violence."
His jaw tightened.
"And it would show you, my human Luna, as a weakness. As someone who can't help in battle, who makes the pack soft." "Varric." Alice knew it instantly. "It's Varric, isn't it? He's behind this." "I suspect, but I have no proof. And I can't act against a high-ranking warrior without evidence, or I'll seem paranoid and tyrannical." The king's arms tightened around her.
"I'm sorry, Elise."
"I brought you into a situation more dangerous than I realized. Don't apologize." Alice turned in his lap to face him. "I'm not fragile, Dimitri. And I'm not useless just because I can't fight like a Lycan. Let me help. Let me do what I do best. Which is being invisible, watching, listening." Alice smiled slightly. "I survived 19 years in my father's house by learning to see things no one thought I'd notice. Let me use that skill now. Let me be the fox in your pack of wolves." The king studied her face, and through the bond, she felt his worry warring with his pride in her. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but carefully, Alice. If Varric realizes you're investigating him, he won't, because he doesn't see me as a threat. I'm just the weak human Luna." Alice leaned forward and kissed him softly, feeling his surprise through the bond. "Trust me." "I do," he murmured against her lips. "More than is probably wise." Over the following weeks, Alice became exactly what she'd promised: invisible, observant, careful. She wandered the castle and the village, listening to conversations, watching interactions, noting who spoke with Varric and what was said afterward. She befriended servants and warriors, asked innocent questions, and pieced together a picture of what was happening. Varric wasn't working alone. He'd gathered a faction of traditionalists who believed the pack had grown weak, that allying with humans was a mistake, that the king's choice of Luna showed poor judgment. They met in secret, planned provocations designed to force conflict, and spread dissent among younger pack members who didn't know better. Alice documented everything, and when she finally brought her findings to the king, his expression was grim. "This is worse than I thought," he said, reading through her notes. "He's not just challenging you, he's challenging my leadership. If I don't handle this perfectly, the pack could fracture." "What will you do?" "I'll confront him publicly. Force him to either back down or challenge me directly for leadership." The king's eyes blazed gold. "And if he challenges me, I'll end this permanently." "Wait." Alice caught his hand. "If you kill him, you turn him into a martyr. His faction will say you were threatened by his strength, that you couldn't tolerate dissent. You'll prove their point about being weakened by choosing me. Then what do you suggest?" Alice thought carefully, her mind working through possibilities. We expose him. We show the pack what he's been doing, the provocations, the lies, the manipulation. We let them see that he's willing to risk war, risk pack members' lives, just to undermine you. And then we give him a choice: swear loyalty publicly or leave Blackmore forever. That's merciful. That's strategic, Alice corrected. We show strength by not needing to kill him. We show confidence by giving him the chance to submit. And we show the pack that we're fair, that dissent is allowed but betrayal isn't. She met his eyes. Trust me, this is the fox's way, not the wolf's. But it'll work. The king pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. You're magnificent, you know that? Absolutely magnificent. The confrontation happened 3 days later in the Great Hall, with the entire pack assembled. The king laid out everything, the evidence Alice had gathered, the documented provocations, the conspiracy to undermine pack stability. Varric stood accused before everyone, unable to deny what was so clearly proven. You have 2 choices, the king said, his voice carrying absolute authority. Swear loyalty to me and to Luna Alice, publicly and without reservation. Or leave Blackmore tonight and never return. Choose now. Varric's face was twisted with rage and humiliation, but he was trapped and he knew it. The pack had seen his treachery. They'd seen the king's mercy in offering exile instead of execution. If he refused both options, he'd be hunted down as a rogue. He dropped to one knee, his voice harsh. I swear loyalty to King Dimitri and Luna Alice. My strength serves Blackmore. My actions will honor the pack. Every word clearly pained him, but he spoke them. Witnessed and accepted, the king said. You remain a warrior of Blackmore. But know this, Varric, you've used your second chance. There won't be a third. As the assembly dispersed, Alice felt the tension in the castle ease. The immediate threat was contained. Varric had been humiliated but not destroyed, which meant his faction had no martyred hero to rally around. The pack had seen Luna's intelligence and their king's strength, working together rather than at odds. You did it, Helena said quietly, appearing at Alice's side. You handled that perfectly. Very few Lunas would have had the cunning to expose a threat without causing bloodshed. I just did what I'm good at, Alice said, but she felt a warm glow of pride. Watched and listened and figured out the truth. That's what a Luna does. You protect the pack in ways the Alpha can't. Helena smiled. You've earned their respect today, Alice. Not because you passed the trials, but because you proved you could lead. That night, alone with the king in their chambers, Alice finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd accomplished. She'd gone from invisible servant to Luna of the most powerful Lycan pack in the territories. She'd survived impossible trials and outsmarted a conspiracy. She'd found her place in a world that should have destroyed her. The king pulled her into his arms, his touch gentle despite his strength. Are you happy? He asked quietly. Alice thought about it, really thought about it. Was she happy? She was terrified half the time, challenged constantly, living in a world of danger and politics and supernatural creatures.
But she was also seen, valued,
connected to someone who looked at her like she was precious. Yes, she said honestly. I'm happy. Are you? More than I expected to be. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, soft touches that made her feel cherished. You're not what I thought I needed, Alice. You're better. You're exactly what I needed without knowing it. The fox and the wolf, Alice murmured. The fox and the wolf, he agreed. Partners. Equals. Mates. Through the bond, Alice felt the truth of his words, the depth of his feelings for her, the way she'd become essential to him without either of them quite realizing when it happened. She felt his respect for her mind, his admiration for her courage, and underneath it all, something that felt an awful lot like love. I was so angry when my father tried to hide me from you, Alice admitted. I thought it was just another rejection. But now I'm grateful. Because if he hadn't, I might never have found the courage to step forward. I might never have become this. You were always this, the king said firmly. You were always strong, clever, and brave. You just needed someone to see it. I'm honored that I got to be that person. Alice kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it, gratitude and affection, and the beginning of something deeper. He responded with careful intensity, mindful of his strength, treating her like she was both precious and powerful. And for the first time in her life, Alice felt like both of those things were true. She was Alice Thorne, Luna of Blackmoor. The girl who'd been rejected had become a queen. The invisible daughter had become impossible to ignore. And she was just getting started. You made it to the end, and that means you're truly part of the Werewolf fans. Thank you for your support. Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be replying as always, and stay subscribed because the next story is already waiting for you.